Oh, hello there. We have been waiting for you. It's been a millennia since we have had a visitor. Please come in and have a seat. Let us get right to the reason behind your visit. Where are you at, you ask? Why, this is the Orion Nebula, and you are its first guest in a long, long time. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let us first discuss the origins of Orion and of the Orion Collective. Orion, known by many titles, such as the King in the Woods or the Master of the Wild Hunt, is the everlasting Lord and King of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and ruler of the Orion Collective. He is immortal, but his existence is irrevocably tied to the seasons. Thus does he pass willingly into his own funeral pyre each midwinter, only to be reborn into thunderous life on the first day of spring. Every collective member feels the lure of their king's wild summons, and many are overcome by this most primal of urges. Drawn to their king's side, they gladly abandon their civilized concerns for the thrill of the hunt and the heady tang of blood upon the wind. The origins of Orion is unclear, for he is not a single entity, but rather comes from many different individuals whom sacrifice themselves so that Orion may be reborn upon this world. Each individual soul merging with those of its predecessor and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 own spirit. It is said that the original vampire who was named Orion was a mighty vampire lord sometime after the Crimson Vampire had aligned themselves to 𝗧𝗵𝗲, during which time a crisis eventually reached the boundaries of their forested homeland. Before long, werewolves marched upon 𝗧𝗵𝗲 once more. This time they came in a throng many tens of thousands strong, with warriors drawn from dozens of holes. It was a force the likes of which can bring low an entire kingdom. When they learned of this threat, the great lords and ladies of the Crimson Vampire held council at the foot of the Oak of Ages, and even the trees of the glade crowded close, as if paying attention to what was said. The devotees of the trickster god performed their ritual dances, and the seers and prophetesses read the skeins of fate in the stars and patterns of flame. In that fire-lit glade, the beautiful Ariel found herself drawn to the Lord Orion. He was the bravest and most handsome of his folk, as Ariel was the wisest and fairest of hers. Whilst the council debated how best to oppose the werewolves, Ariel and Orion were deep in a conversation of their own, seemingly oblivious to the great matters that were discussed around them. Finally, they slipped away unnoticed and unremarked. The mood of the council was otherwise bleak, for it was apparent to all that they could not best the werewolves in battle. Worse, the seers had determined that the wolves were but the lesser of two nascent threats. A great horde of greenskins was but a few days from launching their own assault. It was in that moment of despair that 𝗧𝗵𝗲 finally revealed himself to the vampire. He pledged that the spirits of the forest would fight alongside them if only the battle was brought before winter came. Emboldened by 𝗧𝗵𝗲's words, the vampire prepared their plans anew. In their enthusiasm, they were heedless of the Ancient One's warning that a great sacrifice would be required. It was not until many hours later, when the feast was over, that the absence of Ariel and Orion was noted, but when no amount of searching would reveal them, the errant lovers were reluctantly forgotten. Next day, the great host of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 brought the werewolves to battle. As 𝗧𝗵𝗲 had promised, the vampire did not fight alone. Colossal treemen strode amongst the vampire lines, and great hosts of dryads swarmed about the flanks. Mighty 𝗀𝗲 led the charge, an unstoppable force of nature who sought revenge upon those who had scarred him. Against this host, the werewolves stood little chance. Though they strove with all the stubbornness of their race, they eventually broke and ran, leaving the mountainside heavy with their dead. Alas, scarcely had the last arrow found its mark in werewolf flesh when an icy wind whistled through the boughs of the forest and a chill gripped the land like never before. The cold only hastened the greenskins' onset. In an orgy of destruction, The orcs built great pyres in order to warm their calloused hides. The vampire fought with all their might under skies stained with the ashes of living wood. But the orcs were too many, and their forest spirit allies addled by intense cold. Little by little, 𝗲𝗿 fell to the invaders. The vampire prepared their last stand before the Oak of Ages. They did so with heavy hearts, for they did not believe that they could win, but knew there was no choice save to fight. Then, at dawn, they saw that the forest was transformed. The snows were in retreat, and blood-red blossoms had pushed through the hard ground. Animals had roused from hibernation, and a restlessness could be felt on the air. As the sun rose, the haunting cry of a great horn echoed on the wind. As the note faded, the mighty form of 𝗧𝗵𝗲, god of the hunt, crashed through the woods. A pack of shadowy hounds was baying at his heels, and all the vampire who looked upon him were filled with fresh vigor. The horn was winded a second time, and the greenskins met their doom. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 smashed into the orcs, slaying all before him in an orgy of destruction. Newly awakened dryads swarmed in his wake, eager to bestow their cruel mercies. As the living god plunged deeper into the greenskin lines, the vampire joined the charge, eyes and blades of fire with their god's furious power. By the time the sun set, not a single orc remained alive. In the battle's aftermath, the exhausted vampire came before the Oak of Ages to pay homage. Here they discovered the enthroned figures of Ariel and Orion, now become avatars of 𝗧𝗵𝗲, the mother goddess, and 𝗧𝗵𝗲, the hunter. Another great council was swiftly called, and all the lords and ladies of the forest knelt in worship to Ariel and Orion, now and forever the queen and king in the woods. Visitor, are you still with me? I hope this isn't boring to you. There is but a little more left. Orion is bold, adventurous, arrogant, cunning, and devious. He cares above all else for his family. When his realm is threatened, Orion is the first to fight in its defense. Taking up his mighty weapons of war, he winds his great horn and calls 𝗲𝗿 to the wild hunt. Though Orion's nature is always infused by 𝗧𝗵𝗲's joy of the hunt, his temperament can differ greatly from one year to the next. Whilst Ariel and 𝗧𝗵𝗲 have long been one and the same, their desires merged into a single whole. Orion's personality is a melding not only of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and the Chosen One, but of every vampire who has borne the mantle of kingship since the very beginning. These older minds are faint and seldom influence Orion's actions directly, but still their voices whisper through his thoughts. At times they offer advice, at others they admonish and berate. 𝗧𝗵𝗲 is the strongest voice of all, and the only one that can actively supplant the Chosen One's wishes. Though the hunter god's personality has been eroded through the continual cycle of death and rebirth, his legacy of primal power and divine wisdom is still great beyond mortal reckoning. Such is the reason that the Chosen One must be strong of will, for he must strive with the spirit of 𝗧𝗵𝗲 and dominate the other spirits in his mind if he is not to be driven mad. The rituals of the Chosen One's selection are kept carefully hidden, for there are always those who wish to subvert the process for their own reasons. At various times, both the vampire of Ulthuan and 𝗏𝗏 have sought to interfere in Orion's rebirth, each party hoping to steer the Crimson Vampire in a direction to their liking. Nor, alas, are the folk of 𝗲𝗿 themselves entirely immune to the lure of interference. Despite the sacrifice that the act of Orion's rebirth calls for, many a noble family would be only too glad to see a member of their kin elevated to the position of Ariel's consort, though it be only for a year. In fact, some of the more ambitious lords see the time of the choosing as having the potential for a double victory, that of basking in the reflected glory of a relative's selection, and of no longer having to compete with that relative for further honors. Few vampire would admit to such a sentiment out loud, of course, because 𝗲𝗿 society considers itself to aspire to better than such intrigues, but the truth of the matter lies plain behind many eyes. If one knows only how to look for it, it is not just mortal intrigue that must be guarded against, for there are many gods who would delight to meddle in the act of Orion's rebirth. Chief amongst these is 𝗲𝗵𝗲, the savage huntress. She long ago coveted Ksrnis' affections, and has ever since made no distinction between the godly being for whom she once lusted, and the form he now assumes when striding the mortal world. On many occasions, 𝗲𝗵𝗲 has sought to force the selection of a prince more attuned to her charms than Ariel's. Most of the time, her efforts meet with failure, but not always. The Crimson Vampire speaks seldom of those seasons when Orion's heart is divided. They simply refer to them as the dark years and pledge anew never to let such times occur again. On those occasions when Orion is reborn with a shadowed soul, there is only one consolation, just as there is one final unavoidable woe in those years when he emerges from the Oak of Ages as a paragon of vampiric end. Wise or mad, noble or haunted, each incarnation of Orion must end the same way, in the flames of the midwinter pyre. If only to be reborn anew. Well, that is our story. I bet you have many questions about us. Oh, just one. Who am I? Well, isn't it obvious? I am Orion, of course.